Thank you for your introduction and welcome all of you. And I must say, it says the words of Malcolm X that he mentioned in the Ballad of the Bullet speech that although I am a Muslim, I'm not coming to you today as a Muslim. I'm not coming to you today as a native Chicagoan. I come to you as a Black man living in America. And that's who the late, great John Lewis was and continues to be in the ancestral realm. So I want to make sure that I do him right, do him justice as we commemorate today being the fifth anniversary of his transition to the spiritual realm. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and share the screen and we'll get this thing started. Okay, you all can see there. Uh, there we go. Hopefully, you all the presentation it shows. Yeah. So obviously today, John Lewis Day. I entitled this "Ambitions as a Freedom Rider." Not most of you probably not going to know where I'm going with this, but a few of you do. So we'll talk afterwards once we convene. So, but I wanted to start with something of what this man has done. So in 1960, he was known for the Nashville sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, where Vanderbilt University is, and also the 1961 Summer Freedom Rides. And along those freedom rides, you probably heard the names of Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. So there was kinship and a kindred spirit between the three of them, as it was Dr. King and Rosa Parks, whom he met. But John Lewis, what he became known for in the point of his passing, right before he passed, is basically the quote of good trouble. And if you know me, you know I like to break down words, meanings, derivatives, and such. And good trouble, as John Lewis put it, was he said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and redeem the soul of America. I'm gonna put a pin in that and follow my logic here. I hope it lands right. But if I had administered a test, to a room of college students, and if I have a 70% passing rate among all those students, right? Which is a good thing, I guess, if you want to call it that, we're making progress. But also, I also within that have a 30% failure rate, right? So we have to, those two figures, they complement one another. I put it in mathematical terms because good trouble, as you know, is an oxymoron. And just to lay it plain, the oxymoron is when you take two objects or things that are opposite in nature and you coin them together to express a different idea or concept. So that's what an oxymoron is. So while good trouble is an oxymoron, I'd like to focus on a little spin on it, nuance, we want to call it, of bad obedience. Because John Lewis lived a life, he was a law abiding citizen, as you can see. Look at these, in the president of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, from June of 63 to May of 66. He's been the Atlanta City Councilman from January of 82 to September of 85, and a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from January of 87 to the end of his life. So through that resume, that tells me that this man is a law-abiding citizen, a principled person. So I shudder at the thought of associating trouble with such a principled man, but I want to examine that bad obedience, thing that I kind of like thought about that. And in that bad obedience, we have where currently, in order to, let's say, make a buck, and in order to have social capital, esteem, rapport, you're required to be obedient to morally flawed laws, policies, and beliefs. But just as a voting member of a board or in a congressional hearing, such as keeping in context with what John Lewis was saying, you have a right as a principal person to abstain, right? So the fact that I'm principled, I'm going to be obedient, but not to the bad things. So I don't look at this man, this fine gentleman, as a person who is getting in good trouble. I mean, even though that I understand the gist of what he said, but I just can't, in my good faith, associate trouble with the fine man such as this. So we have a right to abstain from our obedience to corrupt laws. We should be obedient to principles which are more universal, right? And so these are some of the issues that have plagued Black people in this country since our sojourn has began here. Slavery, peonage, redlining, economic apartheid, mass incarceration, Black codes, Jim Crow, housing discrimination, medical apartheid. Think of Henrietta Lacks for the last one. Okay. In here, for centuries, under the institutional practices of these that I've mentioned, we had such an example of that of bad obedience. I think of, for those of you who know the story, William O'Neill, who was an FBI informant, and he was a petty car thief, but he, in his obedience to his FBI handler, sought to undermine the Black Panther Party, and he was successful, sadly to say, and resulted in the demise of the Illinois chairman, the late great Fred Hampton. And so this is one example that stuck out to me as someone who wasn't principled because he was a petty car thief, but he was obedient to the FBI handler, but at his own expense. But he was not wise enough to know that, unfortunately. So William O'Neill caused like social disturbances within the Black Panther Party that were used to justify heavy-handed state-sanctioned response against them. So basically, yeah, in a nutshell, bad obedience is any approach that fails to confront justice or actively contributes to it, whether through apathy or harmful actions, such as what he engaged in that resulted in the loss of life, the assassination, put it frankly, of Chairman Fred Hampton. So we go to slide number 6 here. So in that good trouble phase, and I'm going somewhere with this, this reminds me of what Dr. King called the white moderate in his letter from Birmingham jail. I'm going to read it. Take the time to read it because it's powerful words. And let's move this to the side. Thank you. It's powerful words that resonate within spirit of John Lewis and his kinship with Dr. King in marches upon Edmund Pettus Bridge, which we'll cover shortly. He said, first, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, that bad obedience, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by that myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. There's a gentleman, he's the father of a radio host down here in Southern California, Dominique DePrima. And his name is Amiri Baraka, and he stated that you're either free or you're not. There is no apprenticeship for freedom. Those are his words. So that speak, even though Dr. King wrote this in 63, Dominique DePrima bringing this forward, and this is the words of her father, how she was raised. Her brother, I believe, is a mayor of Newark. I forget his first name, but some of you might know who his name is. So we go on to the next slide. I'm going somewhere here. Hopefully it's in a great enough order for you. So what Dr. King was talking about with the white moderate, right? I hear this term tossed out quite a bit, So the term ally is tossed about in the rough seas of the societal landscape quite often. All an ally does is passively support a cause, but remains on the sideline or apathetic to the cause as it does not directly concern them. So, as such an example is, one can say, well, what happened to Black people is wrong, right? But they staunchly and vehemently disagree with, because usually when I hear that, I always ask and counter, well, how do you feel about foundational Black Americans receiving reparations or reparative restorative justice for what harms that were caused us for over centuries? And then I notice a pivot from the same folks. They'll say, well, I don't know if we can afford to do that. I can go on and on about what we spent money on. And speaking of Dr. King, one of his oft repeated quotes was, budgets are moral documents. You show me your budget, I can tell you what's important to you. Just show me the balance sheet. That's what he's saying. So when there's a reluctance to work to dismantle the structure upon which the folks who I spoke of, their white privilege is built upon, and that white privilege is acknowledged, and that calls into scrutiny the erroneously espoused uneven-handed system of meritocracy and the myth of white societal exceptionalism. Right? Because I can't show that I've been getting help all the time. Like, for instance, like, you remember a cartoon of the tortoise and the hare. So the tortoise outsmarted Bugs Bunny, but for all Bugs Bunny knew, the tortoise said, yep, I was tearing up the road and I beat you fair and square. But I can't tell you that I had my buddies strategically along the race route that made you look like that you were constantly trailing. I can't tell you that. So that's where we come down to when we're talking about the scrutinization of uneven-handed of meritocracy and white societal exceptionalism. So that has to come into play. So, like I put here, ally. Many of us have used the term ally innocuously, but it sounds similar to a lie, right? And so it's nothing personal. It's all in the words. But what we need for you to do is be more of an accomplice, right? It sounds similar to accomplish, right? So to be an accomplice, it is that actively participates in a cause, often taking risk and sharing the burden of responsibility. An accomplice also goes beyond the simple support and actively participates in dismantling systems of oppression. I mentioned Schwerner and Goodman earlier. Viola Liuzzo is another one. She really laid it on the line. It's sad to say that those three examples were over 60 years ago. I'm sure there are more somewhere that maybe I don't know, we haven't ran across paths or what have you, but you get the idea of the difference between an ally, a lie, or an accomplice, an accomplished person. We work together, all right? So these accomplices, and it has a negative connotation, in English language, but that's because English language is the vernacular that expresses law and order as the letter, they say the letter of the law is English language that which is written, and it's on us to learn it. But to be an accomplice, it means, I guess that's what John Lewis meant by getting in good trouble. I'm going to be an accomplice to make sure we can overthrow that, make sure we can bring about societal change. So accomplices work to actively work to change policies, to educate others, or challenge power structures, often at the direction and in collaboration with the marginalized community that they are supporting. With that type of connection, we have bind, bound, and bond, right? So I told you earlier, I'm big on words. As words as language. There's a reason why when you're saying the letters in a word, they call it a spell, as in a witch casting a spell, forward. So what you're asking for through the mouth is it has to be right and exact to what you're seeking, in return, and what the type of world that you want to see. So we have to learn how to articulate that. So I noticed in bind and bound and bond, they sound interchangeably, but I noticed the presence of IOU there. And we remember IOU and old school. I don't see those too often anymore. You may see folks, they may send a request, invoice through PayPal or Cash App to pay them something, but that's the extent of it, but a bind is to tie or fasten something tightly, or it's a predicament or a quandary or a constraint, right? So that's a bind together. A bound, or is a short of boundary, a restriction, or predestined certainty based on a given circumstance, as if that was bound to happen, at some point. That phrasing of the sentence. Bond is a relationship, based on shared feelings, shared interests, a shared experience. So think of two surface objects that are joined together by a bonding agent in science, right? So whether it be rubber, metal, wood, what have you, there's a bonding agent at play there. So in the hip hop circles, there's a couple of acquaintances of mine are hit to this. What is the kind of phrasing that you hear? Word is bond, to the Holy Father. That means that I shall die before my word shall fail. And there's spiritual and scriptural references to that, but it's most oft repeated in hip hop circles. So I realize many of you may or may not be hip to that, but it's okay. But I'm here to tell you and here to share that. So we'll go. And what I mentioned earlier about the complementary math, the example I gave about a 70% passing rate that also is an associated 30% failure rate, so to address both is good, and I'm not trying to be a Bible thumper here, but this example came to mind of the parable of the lost sheep, where, if I'm not going to read the verses, you probably read them in your own time, but there's if a shepherd is guiding 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, he did his job by guiding 99 sheep, but he's also doing a job in going back to get that one sheep that went astray. So depending on how you look at both sides, it goes back to the even the good trouble and bad obedience kind of correlation, the complement of each other. This example came up to me when I think of the oft-repeated phrase of two things being true at the same time, but the reason why I went to great lengths to break this stuff down in a way that I hope it lands, hopefully you all will tell me, is I didn't want the spirit of John Lewis, like many of our human rights activists, to be sanitized, and to also I want to kind of point out, and I'm going to talk about this shortly, that it's been well known that he's had a fractured skull and things like that. And, that shouldn't happen. There's nothing civil about that. That's why I even try to police myself and calling him and Martin Luther King, Jr. and others, James Bevel and so on and so forth, I'm trying to refrain from calling them civil rights rights activists, because there's nothing civil about what you're doing, right? There's nothing civil about what's happened to you. And you're a human rights activist. And I mean, he did sacrifice a great deal. So I'm going to talk about it more, what I feel we should be doing in exchange to show some respect for this man. So we'll go to slide 11 here. Making our way through this pretty good. I didn't think I was going to get through this fast. I hope I'm not going too fast. So another person that came to mind, perhaps I should have led in with this, and I apologize for that being out of order. I thought I had it all figured out, but be that as it may, this is an exhibit of the legacy of slavery here. So you have John Lewis, who shares the same surname as Meriwether Lewis, who was one half of the Lewis and Clark expedition, right? And that fella York, who was a slave, a lifelong slave of William Clark, they were actually the same age. So they let him come along because he was strong and strapping, and he knew how to communicate with the natives. He knew how to hunt. He knew how to forage for food. He knew how to barter and things like that. But while the surname Lewis had this etymological roots in Irish, Scottish, and Germanic tribes, it also has an Americanized equivalent of a similar sounding Jewish surnames, such as Levi and Lewin. Right? It is not all uncommon for folks to share the same surname, as you can see, to forge an artificial kinship with one another due to lineage. But as you can see, between John Lewis and Meriwether Lewis, they don't look like they would be related or any relation, right? I mean, you tell me. Maybe it's just me. I take off the glasses, but I like I said about York, he's a lifelong servant of William Clark, the other half of Lewis and Clark. But York, he was able to forge relationships and rapport with the Nez Perce tribe and the Shoshone tribe of Native Americans to guarantee them safe passage. But at the conclusion of the Lewis Clark expedition, York had to go back into slavery in Kentucky. So even after the efforts that he put forth, and you would think that, oh boy, like I did real good. Master gonna let me go. And Clark was like, negative, you're still a slave. So like, I know we let you carry a firearm when we did hunting while we were on an expedition, but according to Kentucky, the laws of Kentucky at the time of slavery, a slave was forbidden from owning or possessing a firearm of any kind. He was able to make decisions, while they were out in the wilderness. But once they got back home, all those rights were rescinded, from him. And I can't help but to think, you may have heard the term meritorious manumission, where as merit-based freedom that was granted to certain slaves if they promised to move to the whims of their slave master, a lot of times of which to give them a heads up on if there's a revolt that's being planned or anything like that. So you still see vestiges of that to this day. I mean, I'm not saying any Candace Owens. I didn't say any names. Ben Carson. Excuse me. I digress. But what does that type of behavior entail? Now here, John Lewis, he got his skull fractured, but it's not. See, what I wanted to say earlier, and maybe I can articulate it now, is that the wage for human rights should not be on a premium of a white man's nightstick, a white man's bullet, or white man's permission, and that's the part that I felt that it's not John Lewis's fault, but the part of the sanitization of him and Martin Luther King is that oh, well, if a white man killed them, then they must have been important. Well, we have to get out of that thinking, because that thinking is white supremacy in itself, that you put a premium on a white man's bullet, that just because a white man bullet found your skull, that somehow you're more important than someone who wasn't shot, basically. So that's part of the thing that I wanted to kind of like pivot from. So, saying that, there's a book, I just thought I'd share this with you all. This book was written by the late great Charles Mills back in 1997, I believe. It's called The Racial Contract. And Charles, this is an excerpt from Amazon. There's a summation. And so Charles W. Mills demonstrates how this peculiar and unacknowledged contract has shaped, let me move myself out of the way, that has shaped the system of global European domination, and how it brings into existence whites and non-whites together, full persons and subpersons, how it influences white moral theory and moral psychology, and how this system is imposed on non-whites through ideological conditioning and violence. The racial contract argues that the society we live in is a continuing white supremacist state, and you need not any short of evidence to see that is not untrue. So, yeah, we go on to slide number 13. We're almost there. So, John Lewis, one of his galvanizing points that went unnoticed, I didn't find this out till recently myself, is that he was an advocate of mental health. As we know, that it's been widely studied by the National Institute of Health. I have the references. If you all want the references, feel free to contact me, get my contact information. I'd be happy to send you the abstracts, the editorials and things like that, where this research was popped out of. I didn't have time to create an APA page that showed in-text citation of where I'm pulling this information from. But according to the National Institute of Health, this is the concept about weathering that afflicts Black men, women, and children. Okay, so Blacks have a higher rates of morbidity and mortality than whites for almost all health outcomes in the United States. And this inequality increases with age. While these racial disparities are notable, their underlying causes are unclear. The weathering hypothesis was proposed to explain racial health disparities. Weathering is a result of chronic exposure to social economic disadvantage that leads to acceleration of normal aging and earlier onset of unfavorable physical health conditions among disadvantaged versus advantaged persons of a similar age. And speaking of that, Dr. King, a lot of people don't know that he actually attempted suicide twice when he was a young teenager, and he suffered highly from depression while being on the trail of activism, for us. The last 13 years of his life, were under constant threat of physical harm. And we'll surely, unfortunately, with this present administration, we're going to find out more about that as he is falling all over himself to release those files, but kind of silent on Epstein files. But that's another conversation for another time. So with the concept of weathering, I want to land there, be respectful of everyone's time. There is a slide here. I turned the volume down, but it's quick 4 minutes. I'm going to try and fast forward a little bit through it. You probably have seen this before, but this is the equal opportunity race here. Yep, that's the one. Fair use, in case this is circulated, fair use. I ask that you just watch. It'll be very brief. So it's a marathon, as you can see. You see the years ticking. Slavery, broken treaties, genocide, Manifest Destiny, Trail of Tears, Dred Scott, segregation, and so on and the like. Now we're at 1619. Jamestown's already founded. Watch what happens. The man is getting older. He got the bag. He's able to pass it on to the next generation. Look at the years going. He gets older. Revolutionary War. He get to pass the bag on to the next generation. Wealth disparities. Now we're in 20th century. Now here come 1964. Then we're off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Underemployment. Standardized tests. You know what this is. You've seen the 13th. Now she's left to do it by herself. It's not because she's a flawed woman. There's nothing wrong with that woman. This is by design. Racial profiling. Comedian D.L. Hughley said the most dangerous place for a black person to live is in white people's imagination. Dead end. Shortened lifespan. That's the weathering concept that I told you about. So while they're dead, they can look at the connections. White man coasting. But he said he worked hard. Old boy network. Where have we seen that before? I think you get my point, right? So having said all of that, and here we're going to land the plane on the tarmac here. The great Tavis Smiley. He hosts a radio. He owns a radio station out here down in the Crenshaw district. So that's his quote right here. People change either because they either see the light or they feel the heat. So light and heat comprise of the same energy. Silently think to yourselves, which one are you? Do you see the light or do you feel the heat? I'll land my plane there while you marinate on that, and we'll open up the floor for questions.
Jerry, do you have a question in the chat that you could share with us? And Salaam, can you stop sharing your screen so we can see your face?
Yes, indeed. Okay.
There.
You had a good question, Jessica.
Yeah.
I liked it. What can we do? A real practical question. What can we do right now today as people to help? Allies? Wait, what did you say? Allies, not ally?
Well, yeah. As a non-black person,
Yeah.
okay, what can I do to be an ally and not a lie?
Thank you for your question. Actually, and I'm not besmirching, but I think we truly know what we do. We're all human beings. We want the same things. Like we don't want anything different than you want. I've read on the back of the newspaper for the Nation of Islam, the final call. it has back there what Honorable Elijah Muhammad stated as, well, we want complete freedom. You all want complete freedom as well, right? Didn't Paul Revere in the Midnight Ride, and didn't Patrick Henry say, "Give me liberty, give me death"? So that ain't no different than what I want. You know what I'm saying? So like, I mean, pause right there, because my brother and my cyber brother, mine, Jay, in Dallas, Texas, he said the first step is to educate yourselves, truly educate yourself, and be an advocate for justice. You know, as I mentioned, that being an accomplice. So I say this, Reverend Jessica, really drive it home. And I'm going to use an example that we see in the San Fernando Valley. When a neighborhood like in the northern San Fernando Valley is an enclave, right? Very sought after area to live in. As soon as a plan of a Home Depot was going to go up, what did the citizens do? They didn't ask what needed to be done. They took immediate action right then and there, because they knew that they didn't want that in their neighborhood. So the thing is remember the golden rule. Is like what you want for yourself is what you should want for others. Dr. Claude Anderson, and you can Google these names, he has a different twist on it, on the golden rule. He said, he who has the gold rules. So how do we get them to share? All right. So
Yes.
that comes down to humanity. And I'll say something in the chat right quick. If you see the term humanity, let's play an anagram. What's a word in humanity? You see that?
Oh, unity. Okay.
So I can pull unity out of humanity. But if there's a lack of humanity against me as marginalized foundational Black Americans, if I air my grievances and say, hey, you're violating my humanity, don't throw up, say, well, oh, we're all one race, or we're all human race. No, because you see it right here phonetically. You can pull unity out of humanity, but I can't pull humanity out of unity. You follow what I'm saying? It only works, is not backwards compatible. So if we remember humanity and seek that, unity's gonna come. The problem is we don't seek the former. We look for the latter. We want that easy fix. We're quick to say, well, I don't see I don't see race, I don't see color. When folks say they don't see race, they want to say that because they don't want to see racism. So that's the problem there. So you can't have a racial utopia without racial accountability. So that brand ambassadorship, if you will, of white comfort. So utopia without accountability is oppression dressed in harmony, right? So like pushing a racial unity thing without holding white institutions accountable for harms to Black people, you're not promoting justice, you're promoting silence. So a racial utopia that requires Black silence is not peace. That's control. You want to wordsmith how freedom sounds to you in your ears. You want to try to fashion it and make it like watered down and sanitized. We can't play that game. It was not going to work, because love without justice is just performative, and unity without truth is nothing more than deception.